Polygamy was marketed as a higher calling, a spiritual architecture designed to produce harmony, shared purpose, and a well-managed village of adults raising children with collective care. What it produced here was a long-running case study in how to industrialize resentment, outsource accountability, and still insist, straight-faced, that everyone is family, right up until the moment a convenient villain is needed. And no, the villain is not the system. That would require intellectual honesty. The villain, by long-standing family tradition, is Meri. The most revealing part of the so-called apology era is not the apology itself, an exercise in scripted contrition that rarely survives contact with a follow-up question, but the way it re-illuminates the original trio's relationships with one another, and how expertly the family learned to treat interpersonal complexity as if it were a single-person defect. Meri and Janelle are the clearest example of what this family always could have been if it had valued adulthood over alliance building. They began as friends and quickly became adversaries under the predictable strain of being married to the same man. Jealousy, competition, mismatched domestic standards, and the especially delicate challenge of watching one wife accumulate children while another is left to absorb the social penalties of not doing so. The early stories are familiar. Meri as the jealous gatekeeper, Janelle as the fertile pragmatist. And they have been repeated for years with the confidence of people who believe repetition is the same as resolution. But the more current pattern suggests something less simplistic: effort. Janelle has shown visible attempts at connection, including public moments of solidarity and shared presence in spaces that had nothing to do with Cody's ego management. Meri, for her part, has demonstrated genuine emotional responsiveness in moments of real family tragedy, including visible shock and devastation around Garrison's death. And when the family's finances and property disputes turned into a slow-motion demolition derby, most notably around Coyote Pass, there were signs of communication and mutual support that do not fit the official narrative of permanent hostility. Now, with Janelle reaching out again and explicitly seeking Meri's help on a spiritual release, the relationship reads less like a dead friendship and more like a buried one. Battered, complicated, but not beyond repair. In other words, the kind of relationship that could have been compelling television if the show were interested in human development rather than staged self-pity and recycled grievances. The appetite for more Meri and Janelle content makes sense because it offers the one thing this franchise avoids like sunlight: two adults interacting without a shared need to audition for Cody's approval. Christine, however, is where the moral marketing collapses into performance art. Leaving was courageous. There is no need to pretend otherwise. But courage is not a lifetime achievement award that excuses every subsequent choice. The post-exit persona has drifted from finally free into something closer to perpetually narrating the same liberation story, as if the only way to prove the escape was real is to recite it in front of witnesses at every possible opportunity. Even a new husband becomes less a partner than a convenient audience, positioned for ongoing commentary about the previous marriage as though a fresh life is best enjoyed as a commentary track. The tonal shift is hard to miss. The warmth that once read as the nicest wife now often reads as mean girl satisfaction, the kind that mistakes being done with someone for being superior to them. The sharpest example is how thoroughly Meri has been written off, and how proudly that severance is displayed, on grounds that, while not trivial, are selectively curated. One allegation is broadly credible on its face: persistent belittling and putting someone down in front of others. That kind of dynamic can be corrosive and it is not unreasonable to set hard boundaries around it. But the second justification is the kind of anecdote that exposes more about family hypocrisy than about the alleged offender. A child being scolded after being short a small amount of money for sweets, triggered by a sibling's tattling. That story is presented as emblematic cruelty. Yet it sits inside a broader parenting environment where harsher practices existed without producing comparable moral panic. Soap in mouths, escalating household conflict, and children choosing to live with another mother at various points because of constant headbutting. Meri, notably, is the mother some of those children turned toward for refuge, and at least one child was described as being gotten by Meri in a way another mother struggled to achieve. The point is not that Meri was a saint. The point is that the family's moral accounting is selective to the point of parity. Somehow, Cody's long-term neglect of children is tolerated for years. Somehow, Robin's exclusionary household rules, including limiting access during COVID and creating a climate where the other children were treated like visiting contaminants, is metabolized with remarkable restraint. Somehow, Janelle can admit to avoiding the home by going to movies after work and still be framed as the stable adult. Somehow, Christine can run a home where chaos is functionally a parenting style and still claim moral superiority over someone whose primary sin may have been insisting on structure. If this were actually about principle, the ledger would be crowded. Instead, the ledger has one oversized entry: Meri, primary villain, written in permanent marker, because it is simply easier for everyone else. The abuse allegations around Meri, primarily associated with McKelty and Payton, demonstrate the same family habit. Take the most volatile or attention-drawing claims, let them flare, then allow the ambiguity to do the long-term reputational damage. Both accusers have reputations for erratic presentation and for making broad, simplistic pronouncements, sometimes on sensitive topics like postpartum depression, that raise questions about judgment and responsibility. Both have reportedly backtracked in various ways. None of that proves that harm did not occur, and it does not entitle anyone to dismiss allegations outright. But it does highlight a pattern. The family appears comfortable equating strictness and discipline with abuse when the disciplinarian is the designated outcast, while minimizing or normalizing other harmful behaviors when they come from approved figures. Meri is widely acknowledged as difficult, aggressive, dysregulated, hard-edged, and that likely made her a painful person to live with. The more honest interpretation, however, is that these traits were not an isolated character defect. They were symptoms of a collective dysfunction created by an oppressive arrangement. The family's coping styles formed a dysfunctional ecosystem. Christine as chaotic and attention-seeking, Janelle as avoidant and conflict-evading, Meri as confrontational and controlling. In that environment, children were exploited through adultification and inconsistent parenting, and wives competed for favor in a system that rewarded betrayal. The scandal is not that nobody was healthy. The scandal is that the show still tries to sell the idea that only one person was unhealthy enough to matter. The most biting proof of the scapegoat dynamic is how the family treats Meri's role as both strict and organized. In a household where some adults thrived in chaos, structure becomes a provocation. Rules become mean. Consistency becomes control. And for children accustomed to permissiveness, boundaries can easily be reframed as cruelty, especially when the adults around them benefit from validating that reframing. That is how a family manufactures a tumor. Name it, blame it, and then use it as proof that the rest of the body is fine. Cody's role in this is not incidental. It is essential. He made it safe to blame Meri, and safety in this family usually means aligning with the man who controls affection, attention, money, and narrative. The backstory with Janelle and Meri underscores why the friendship was strained and why its survival now is, paradoxically, the most interesting subplot available. Janelle's pre-marriage history includes the uncomfortable optics of being close to Meri's family, then pursuing Meri's husband via a so-called calling, and doing so in a manner that appears to have ignored the ethical standards the religion itself claims to uphold, namely, that wives invite and approve potential sister wives rather than husbands seeking them unilaterally. Add in flirty lunches behind Meri's back, the attempted wedding date landing on Meri's birthday, defended with bureaucratic excuses that evaporate the moment alternative dates prove possible, and domestic friction so intimate it includes awareness of the couple's sex life and imposed restrictions on affection because it made a sister wife uncomfortable. That is not a recipe for sisterly bonding. It is a recipe for long-term resentment. Yet, even there, the current moment suggests something rare. Two adults who might be willing to bury a hatchet precisely because they have already spent decades learning what happens when they do not. Coyote Pass, of course, is the accelerant Cody will predictably use to keep wedges in place. He does not resolve conflicts, he leverages them. That is why the apology tour feels less like repentance and more like brand management. The tour's central flaw is that it wants credit for remorse without paying the cost of accountability. There is plenty of staged tenderness and carefully phrased regret about marriages, but far less willingness to confront the most consequential damage: the destruction of relationships with the original children. Again and again, the wives point toward the obvious repair work, rebuilding bonds with the OG 13. And again, Cody tries to shut the conversation down, reframing the estrangement as a product of mothers trash-talking him, rather than his own televised contempt. He has spent years on international television announcing he never loved certain wives, never found them attractive, and was merely going through the motions. Then he acts bewildered that the children did not interpret this as a love letter to their mothers. This is not denial as a psychological defense. It is denial as a business strategy. Even better, the narrative sometimes attempts to blame polygamy itself or reality television, as if the man at the center had no agency, no choices, and no public record of his own words. Conveniently, discussion of the kids becomes verboten when it threatens to move the storyline from wounded husband to failed father. That is the apology tour in a sentence. Apologies are available for the optics of romance, but accountability for parenting is out of stock. Where Meri becomes unexpectedly compelling is in refusing to perform the emotional labor the tour requires from its targets. In key scenes, Cody attempts his familiar tactics: controlling tone, nudging reactions, directing the emotional beat, and runs into a wall. A Meri who does not take the bait. Even small gestures, an irritating facial cue demanding compliance, the insistence that she should be happy with her portion of property, are met not with pleading or outrage, but with the kind of calm non-response that punctures a control addict's script. It is not dramatic in the way reality TV prefers. It is dramatic in the way real power shifts actually happen. The "you should be happy" remark is particularly revealing because it is not merely rude, it is instructive. It frames fairness as a gift granted by the man who tried to deny it. It also implies that Meri's claim is optional, despite her contributions and her long-standing role in the family's financial ecosystem. The skepticism about property division is not paranoia, it is pattern recognition. There is a strong suspicion that the monogamous couple, Cody and Robin, benefited from a return to the older dynamic. The original wives effectively subsidizing the lifestyle of the pair who enjoyed disproportionate resources. Robin's self-congratulation about making things more fair lands poorly against the broader belief that she fleeced the other wives, and that true fairness would require Cody and Robin to relinquish more than they have been willing to put on the table. The money questions do not stop with Coyote Pass. The Flagstaff era invites its own audit, particularly around housing decisions. Meri was once denied support for purchasing the B&B and was effectively told to find a loan solution without family backing, while Cody's own business missteps apparently consumed allocated resources. Later, in Flagstaff, Christine reportedly purchased a home before selling the Las Vegas home, prompting a reasonable question: where did the down payment come from? And how did those decisions ripple through the family's shared finances? If equity was leveraged, did it indirectly disadvantage Janelle and Meri? If family funds were used, was that ever transparently reconciled? If these questions are addressed elsewhere, they have not been absorbed into the show's moral narrative with anything resembling the intensity directed toward Meri's alleged sins. And then there is Robin, once edited and performed as the gentle, spiritually minded prize of plural marriage, now increasingly read as a woman discovering that winning means living full-time with the man she helped isolate from everyone else. The recent facial expressions tell a story even the confessionals cannot fully control. Exhaustion, a muted trappedness, a diminishing of the earlier smug confidence. In the previous arrangement, Robin benefited from scarcity. Sharing Cody allowed her to play coy, to compete, to keep desire alive through absence, and to position herself as the misunderstood favorite in a crowded narrative. Monogamy eliminates the funhouse mirrors. Now she has the best customer at home all the time, and the fantasy of polygamy as a curated experience, majority access without full responsibility, has collapsed. This is where interpretations diverge in interesting ways. One reading is that the mask has slipped, and what is visible is a controlled version of narcissistic injury, publicly managed because cameras are present, privately less restrained. Another reading is that the persona itself is performance, an attempt to generate sympathy, while off-camera sightings show a happier couple, suggesting the on-camera distress is a tactical narrative. A third layer speculates about health, perimenopause, thyroid issues, inflammation, low energy, as a contributing factor, though those remain conjectures without medical confirmation. What is consistent across these interpretations is the conclusion. Whatever version of polygamy Robin wanted, this is not it. Even sympathetic readings concede she wanted a different model than the one she joined. A model where decades of prior sacrifice were irrelevant, and her preferences would become the new family standard. She seemingly believed Cody was a better man than he is, assumed he would maintain at least occasional care for other wives and children, and overplayed her hand by monopolizing him for her tenders while expecting everyone else to fall in line. Now she is left with the results: a man who prioritizes himself, a shattered extended family, and a public image that can no longer pretend she is merely a passive recipient of Cody's dysfunction. The rental-to-purchase housing saga in Flagstaff captures the same theme in miniature. Perform reluctance, secure the advantage, feign humility, accept the blessing. The reaction to moving into a large, attractive home was widely read as ungrateful. But the harsher interpretation is that it was theater, an effort to avoid looking greedy while taking more than a fair share from shared family resources. The belief is that proceeds from the Las Vegas home sales, specifically half of Janelle's and all of Meri's, were used as part of the down payment, with the couple choosing not a smaller rental, but a purchase that served their comfort. Legal but morally disgusting is a blunt assessment, yet it fits the pattern of spiritual rhetoric being used to cover material self-interest. Even the gratitude narrative becomes telling, thanking God for provision while neglecting to acknowledge the wives whose money likely helped provide it. In that context, praise is reserved for heaven, while accountability is reserved for Meri. This is why the networks themselves become part of the critique. TLC and Bravo are not neutral observers. They are incentivized curators of dysfunction. There is open contempt for executives who will platform ethically dubious personalities, resurrect favorites despite their reputations, and simultaneously posture as socially responsible via documentaries, while giving a misogynistic, cult-adjacent family patriarch decades of airtime to normalize harmful ideologies. Yet the cynicism comes with an admission that is as honest as it is damning. The programming is still watched. The networks may be accused of scraping the bottom of the barrel, but the barrel remains profitable because the audience keeps showing up, even if sometimes through podcasters rather than direct viewership. The frustration peaks around the prospect of an apology to Robin, an idea that inspires revulsion not because apologies are inherently bad, but because an apology to the person who benefited most from the family's collapse feels like a final insult to the original wives and children who absorbed the costs. If there is an apology tour worth televising, it is the one that names specific harms to the OG-13 and outlines concrete repair. The expectation is that this will never happen, because ego cannot tolerate the downgrade from tragic romantic hero to accountable father. The show's other recurring problem is content starvation. There is a sense that none of the principals have new material. They are answering producer prompts, recycling book excerpts, and rehashing old logic as if viewers need remedial instruction after 15 years. Christine, in particular, is criticized for being stuck on a loop, repeating the same polygamy explanations and past grievances with minimal evolution. There is a partial defense that she may be protecting her children's privacy, especially with Truly as the only child still at home, and using old stories instead of turning her kids into storyline fuel. That is a plausible and even responsible motive. But responsible motives do not automatically make for compelling television, and the critique is ultimately about the product. If the show can only offer repeated monologues and scripted confrontations under tightened NDAs, then it has become a franchise of diminishing returns. The rare moments of tension that still land, like Meri challenging Cody until he retreats, or David reportedly holding Cody accountable as a father and provoking defensive posturing, stand out precisely because they pierce the fog of pre-approved dialogue. Even those moments, however, carry the suspicion of strategic planning. Perhaps the parenting accountability storyline is being saved for a future season, parceled out like a marketing campaign rather than treated as an urgent moral obligation. Finally, the Darger comparison functions as an unintended indictment. Not following each other on social media is trivial on its face, yet it aligns with a broader observation. Other polygamous families, however flawed, can look at Cody and see reputational risk. Commentary attributed to Joe Darger frames Cody's failure as ego-driven and managerial. He wanted obedience without leadership, control without competence, and compliance without community. Joe is not presented as a saint. More control than chaos is still control, but He is described as involved, as someone who cares for wives and children and promotes a family culture. Cody, by contrast, is repeatedly reduced to his truest devotion, himself. He pitted wives against one another, created a culture where betrayal was rewarded, and now finds even his remaining household strained by the man he has always been. The family's arc, then, is not a morality play with one villain and three heroes. It is a systemic failure in which every adult contributed harm in different ways, and in which one adult, the husband, benefited most from keeping the others fragmented. Meri is not absolved. She is simply no longer permitted to carry everyone else's sins as if she alone invented dysfunction. The most damning conclusion is also the simplest. The family learned to survive by scapegoating a single person, and the network learned to profit by filming it. The surprise is not that relationships fractured. The surprise is that any relationships, like the complicated, potentially reparable connection between Meri and Janelle, remain salvageable at all. Subscribe for more.